This is an open letter to Mr. John Stewart and Mr. Glenn Beck. First of all, I should say that I don't have a horse in this game, and I don't have a horse in any game about the matters about which I speak of. I don't have any horse in any of those games, and thank God for that. But I feel that I have to put in my 2 cents. If my 2 cents is helpful, great. If it's not helpful, who cares? At least I know that I have not spared my change. So, in the spirit of not sparing my change, here is my 2 cents. The solution to the West Asia problem between Israel and Palestine, the solution is quite simple. It's just that, it's not helpful to the pink skin empire. Therefore, a lot of, very intelligent men, they seem like they're grasping in the dark, and they don't see the solution. It's right there in front of them, and many of them are much, much more intelligent than all of us. So I'm sure they know the solution, but they don't want to put their finger on it, because the solution, as far as, global empire of the pink skin is concerned, that solution is not helpful. So they pretend that solution doesn't exist, or that solution is not good, it's bad. Okay, here's my 2 cents, here's my solution. I could be wrong, but I could be wrong. There is a phrase in English language, very crude, but to the point. It says, you don't shit where you eat, and consequently, you don't eat where you shit. Now, if any of you who speaks a second language or a third language knows that uh, they're equivalent to this phrase, there are proverbs and phrases and common knowledge that says the same thing in other languages. In most other languages, there is a similar understanding, phrase, proverb, whatever. You don't shit where you eat. If you consider the situation between Israel and Palestine right now, the solution is going back to this proverb, to this phrase. How? It starts from 1948. 1948, Israel declared independence. Now, as far as I know, independence is basically says I am self-sufficient, more or less. I don't need help from anybody. I stand on my feet. Okay, fine. Israel declared independence in 1940 something, 8, I think. How come it that ever since the day Israel declared independence, it has been receiving a lot of financial and military help from the West, the Pink Skin Empire, the Anglo-Saxon Empire, the White People Empire? How come? You're either independent or you're not independent. If you cannot make ends meet, you're not independent. You are dependent. So the day Israel actually, the truth is, up to the day Israel declared independence, it was independent, more or less, the Jewish people in Israel who had settled down. Up to that day, they were independent. They were doing business locally with the local people and neighboring countries, and they were somewhat independent. The day Israel declared independence is the day actually the Jewish people in Israel became dependent on the handout from the West, from the Pink Skin Empire. You see, you don't shit where you eat. The Jewish people who settled in Palestine were independent before they declared independent. In the perspective that up to the point they declared independent, They were independent. They were independent on that piece of land. They were doing business with the locals, natives, with their neighbors, with their people in the street, and people in the next town, people in the next country. They were independent up to the day they declared independence. From that day on, actually the Jewish people who settled in Israel became dependent because they could no longer eat locally. Because they declared independence, they became dependent on the West, the Pink Skin Empire, and by declaring independence and showing their dependence on the West, they brought the wrath of the locals against them. They inflamed the locals by declaring an independent state and starting pushing out the locals, the natives. So Israel has not been independent for 75 years. In fact, Israel is a dependent state. Is the most dependent state in the world because it's dependent on all the handout that Israel receives from the London, Paris, and most importantly New York and Washington. Israel is the most dependent country in the world. And independent means you do your business locally, you make business, you treat neighbors well, so you can do business with them and live well amongst them. That's how you become independent. If you can survive independently. If you can't survive independently, you're not dependent. You're not independent, Israel. Mr. John Stewart, Israel is not independent. It's stopped becoming independent in 1948 and became dependent on the handout. Now, what is the solution to Israel? Any 5-year-old at this point can tell you. Simple. If you cut the financial and the military and all kinds of support to Israel, Israel has to become codependent in the neighborhood. So that means it cannot take a dump in the neighborhood. You see, you don't shed where you eat. You don't shed where you're supposed to eat. You don't shed where you want to eat. Israel doesn't want to eat in the Middle East because it's eating in Washington, London, and Paris. So Israel is not dependent on the neighborhood in the Middle East to eat, to survive, because it's sitting at the table with London, Paris, and New York, having a good old time, have a feast at the table of London, Paris, and New York, and this feast is at the expense of the poor people in London, Paris, and New York. You have your own children, and then you have a adopted child, and most of your income is going to the adopted child, not to your own children. But the problem is that that's not even good for the adopted child. The handout of the West to Israel is not good for Israel. It's not good for Jewish people of Israel. Let's put it this way. Why? Because that dependency means that they don't have to eat in the Middle East. What does that mean? That means they don't have to like their neighbors. They don't have to treat their neighbors fairly, because you can't, hold the gun to somebody's head and say, you have to do business with me. No, they have to like you to do business with you, so you can eat. It's as simple as that. They have to like you to do business with you, so you can eat. Arab people or Muslim people are not specially unfriendly to Jewish people. They're unfriendly towards all other who don't follow Islam. That's the general idea. But more or less, the fucking people, if you leave them alone, they leave you alone, except where, some really nasty places like Pakistan or Afghanistan. If they just, they're backwards, and bombing them is not going to send them forwards. Fucking people. Anyway, my point is this, that in Iraq, in Iran, in Turkey, in Jordan, in Egypt, they're not necessarily nasty. The Muslims are not necessarily nasty to the Jewish. They don't kill them. They don't hang them just because they're there. They have been living together generation after generation, so they tolerate them. Not, it all goes. It's all on the up and down scale. Sometimes they tolerate less. Sometimes they tolerate more. But it's still they still exist. They're like 20 generations of Jewish people living in Syria. 20 generations of Jewish people have been living in Jordan. If they have done something like Auschwitz, they wouldn't be there. So they're tolerated, they're discriminated against, but they're not sent to the fucking concentration camps and killed. My point is this. My point is this. These Jewish people in those countries have been doing business by, making more friends than enemies. Israel is not there to make friends in the Middle East. Under normal circumstances, Israel would have to make friends. Not by holding a gun to people's heads, no, by treating them nice, by treating them fairly. That's how you make friends. And that's how, through friends, you make business, and that's how, through business, you can eat. So by shitting in a place, you lose friends, you lose business, you can't eat. Is that difficult to grasp? Solution: cut off all aid to Israel. Say, Israel, from today, you actually have to become independent. What does that mean? What is the first solution to Israel if its objective is to be independent? If all aids are cut tomorrow, what happens? Well, simple. Israel wakes up in the morning and says, okay, what is this? If I'm not receiving a check tomorrow from New York by individual rich people or by governments in London, Paris, and New York, if I'm not getting any money, what do I have to do? I have to make ends meet here. I can't go sit at the big boys' table and have a feast with them. I have to make my living here. I have to do business. What is making my living here means that United States, Uncle Sam's managers have understood this much, that they cannot make enemies with Canada and Mexico. They have to, create some kind of cooperative council that's NAFTA and MCAIS and Istastus, Tustastus. Doesn't make any difference. The whole idea is you don't shit where you eat. If you need to eat with Canada and Mexico at the same table because you're neighbors, you don't shit all over them. You don't shit at the table. Israel, if it has to, because neighbors come first. If you eat, you can't. It's not, it's not economically viable if you have to. Your business partners are on the other side of the fucking planet. It's not economically viable that your only business partners are not on the other side, are on the other side of the planet. It's not business-wise viable. So what does that mean? That means your primary partners in business must be your neighbors. Must be. And that means that, so you have to keep very friendly relationship with your neighbors, because that's where your business comes, primary profitable business comes from. The farther you have to send your products or ship products from, the more expensive those products become. That means your most profitable business are with your neighbors. So Israel wakes up in the morning and says, the check is not arriving in the mail, honey. We have to do business with Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. These are the 4 primary neighbors. We have to do business with these 4. Or else, at the end of the month, we can't pay the rent. Okay. Do you understand how then Israel has to become flexible and not be so racist towards the native brown population? Not to start bombing the neighborhood out of fear, out of some other ideas. They can't do that because they have to make their living in that neighborhood. So they put their best foot forward, shake hands, sit at the same table, stop treating the native brown population in a racist and discriminatory way, stop pushing the native population out of their land. They're pushing the brown people of Middle East out of their land, and they're planning on importing Indians to do the job that these brown people that were doing. They were the native of the land and they were doing those jobs. The pinkskins, in their bright idea, decided exactly step by step, steps that British colonialism took, Israel is taking. That's exactly what the British did in South Africa, in South America, in the Caribbean. They brought the local population, the redskin population was eliminated, and they brought Indians to work. They brought blacks people and Indians, and eventually Indians moved up to middle management, and black people continued working because they could endure more than the Indians. But my point is this: the step by step, Israel is doing the same thing. Push the brown people native to the land out. Okay, but still we need the work. They're importing their workforce. You can only shit where you don't eat. You can only treat the locals like shit in a place where you actually are not local, i.e. you don't have to eat locally. All these sophisticated people that you have in your whole bureaucratic apparatus can't see the solution. If they really wanted peace, the solution is simple: stop funding Israel. Israel, instead of shitting in the neighborhood, Israel has to eat in the neighborhood, just like every other country in this world. Because they have to eat in the neighborhood, they will become an inclusive, secular society overnight, and they will include all the native brown people and this and that and the other into the system, and stop bringing Indians over to make the problem even more complicated. Folks, bringing Indians over, if that was the solution, my Israeli friends, if that was the solution, South Africa would still be apartheid. Huh? That's not it. Bringing Indians doesn't help anything. Bringing Indians into the mix doesn't. The Indians help with nothing. If you think you can save the apartheid state by replacing the native brown labor with non-native brown labor, that's the British already tried that in South Africa. Fuck. How many times do you guys have to repeat the same shit over again? Solution: stop funding. Allow Israel to actually become independent, and therefore actually having to make a living there where it is. Therefore actually have to treat its neighbors with respect, and its population, all of its population, even the brown ones, with respect and equal rights, because they want to eat, and they have to do business locally because they can't depend on London, Paris, and New York. That day Israel becomes independent, that day is where war stops in the Middle East. That day that you stop feeding the system over there. At the day you kick Israel, you send Israel out to fend for itself, to really fend for itself, to really become independent. That day is the day that we won't have any issues in the Middle East. Everybody, whoever is living there, is going to live peacefully for 1,000 years, I can assure you. But then here's the problem: why is the people wiser than I pretend that they don't see the solution? They're just grasping in the dark and they can't see the solution. This is the why reason. The why they pretend they can't see the solution is because they don't want Israel to live in peace. Because the function of Israel is to antagonize and subdue the natives in West Asia. That's the function of Israel. The whole idea that the neighbors don't want Israel to live in peace, and Israel deserve, Israel wants peace, and no, that's not the thing. That's not the plan. The day Israel becomes peaceful with its neighbors is the day London, Paris, and New York lose interest in Israel. The day Israel becomes peaceful, lives in peace in that neighborhood that for whatever reason they have chosen to live in, that shithole, the day they live in peace, London, Paris, and New York will have no use for Israel. Because as far as they're concerned, the primary function of Israel is to antagonize, inflame, and then subdue the natives of West Asia on behalf of the Pink Skin Empire. That's all. That's the primary function of Israel. Antagonize, inflame, and then subdue with all the weapons we send you. Antagonize, inflame, and then subdue the natives, because that helps the cause of the Pink Skin Empire. Period. Zionism is just a name they used for Salt Lake City. They also used it for Los Angeles. They used it for New England. They used it. Zionism is a joke white people play on the rest of the world. Salute. Yeah, your Zion cannot be next to Buckingham Palace. Your Zion has to be in Salt Lake City. Seriously?